for tonight.
Therefore, today, I'm announcing the House of Representatives moving forward with an official impeachment inquiry.
Impeachment on the horizon. The Speaker of the House says President Trump's actions with Ukraine requires a serious investigation. Then, alone before the world, as calls for his impeachment swirl, President Trump defends his America First vision at the United Nations. Plus, more Brexit chaos. Britain's Supreme Court rules the Prime Minister broke the law when he suspended Parliament. And Know My Name. Chanel Miller, the survivor of the Stanford University rape case, reclaims her voice and speaks out.
I would look around and think, is anyone actually hearing me? It's a terrifying position to be in, to feel like you can cry on the stand, that you could yell a statement and people still don't hear you.
All that and more on tonight's PBS NewsHour.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by
Can I get some help?
Life well planned. Learn more at RaymondJames.com.
Consumer Cellular offers no-contract wireless plans that are designed to help you do more of the things you enjoy. Whether you're a talker, texter, browser, photographer, or a bit of everything, our U.S.-based customer service team is here to find a plan that fits you. To learn more, go to consumercellular.tv.
BNSF Railway. And with the ongoing support of these institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Questions of impeachment are growing tonight around President Trump. The Speaker of the House says the House is moving forward with an official impeachment inquiry. That's after a whistleblower alleged that the president tried to force a foreign leader to aid his re-election. In turn, the president says he'll release the record of a critical phone call. Congressional correspondent Lisa Desjardins begins our coverage.
A dizzying day of developments. At the Capitol late this afternoon, Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi went further than ever on formally beginning impeachment.
The actions of the Trump presidency revealed the dishonorable fact of the president's betrayal of his oath of office, betrayal of our national security, and betrayal of the integrity of our elections. Therefore, today, I'm announcing the House of Representatives moving forward with an official impeachment inquiry.
Meanwhile, at the United Nations, the president arrived this morning to talk about U.S. policy, but immediately faced questions about his own actions and whether he pressured Ukraine to investigate the Biden family.
I think it's ridiculous. It's a witch hunt.
He seemed to confirm and defend the fact that he withheld hundreds of millions of dollars in aid for Ukraine recently.
My complaint has always been, and I'd withhold again, and I'll continue to withhold until such time as Europe and other nations contribute to Ukraine, because they're not doing it.
The Washington Post and others reported the president froze nearly $400 million in aid for Ukraine this summer, 1 week before a phone call with newly elected Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. It is still not clear if the withheld money came up on that call, but this afternoon, Mr. Trump announced he has ordered the release tomorrow of the complete and unredacted transcript of the conversation. In turn, House Intelligence Chair Adam Schiff said the whistleblower wants to testify before his committee as early as this week. Meanwhile, calls for impeachment grew.
I have been patient while we tried every other path and used every other tool. I truly believe, the time to begin impeachment proceedings against this president has come.
It was a remarkable 24 hours for Democrats, starting with a cannon blast in the Washington Post from 7 freshman Democrats, all with military and national security backgrounds. All sit in vulnerable districts and had previously been hesitant to call for impeachment. Now they write, if the allegations are true, we believe these actions represent an impeachable offense. We do not arrive at this conclusion lightly. On the campaign trail in Delaware today, former Vice President Joe Biden pushed back against any allegations of wrongdoing.
This president would attack me and anyone else who he thought would be a threat to his winning again. Well, that's what he does. That's what he's always done. And note that even though every reputable publication has looked at the charge that has been made against me, they found them baseless and untrue and without merit, that's not about to stop him.
Republicans, meanwhile, are largely urging restraint. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell.
What we have here is an allegation related to Ukrainian aid by a whistleblower. That's about all we know now. I'm not going to address all of these various hypotheticals that have been aired out about what may or may not happen in the House. And I think all of that's quite premature.
But even within the president's own party, concern is brewing. Louisiana Senator John Kennedy said both the Bidens and the president's phone calls should be investigated.
I can tell you that what the American people are saying. They're saying, you know what, we'd like to know more about the conversation between the president and President Zelensky. But we'd also like to know what this business about Hunter Biden is.
President Trump meets with the Ukrainian president tomorrow as House Democrats press forward with an impeachment resolution.
As the push for impeachment grows, we want to hear from Capitol Hill. We start with one of the 7 freshman Democrats who wrote that piece in the Washington Post. Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger is a Democrat from Virginia, and she sits on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. We spoke earlier this evening. Congresswoman Spanberger, thank you very much for being here. You obviously heard the Speaker's announcement that she is moving forward with an official impeachment inquiry. In the piece that you wrote in the Washington Post last night, you wrote, quote, "These allegations," this is about the president's behavior with regards to Ukraine, "are stunning, both in the national security threat they pose and the potential corruption they represent." You spent some time in the CIA. Can you give me a sense about what is it that is most troubling about his behavior?
What's most troubling about these allegations is the fact that we see a president who allegedly pressured a foreign government to provide information, to dig up dirt on a political opponent, and that he potentially sought to use security assistance funds, taxpayer dollars, to leverage and to create that pressure. From a national security perspective, this is tremendously worrisome on multiple fronts. First and foremost, the fact that we would have security assistance funding at play, leveraged, potentially not going where it needs to go after it's been appropriated by Congress is troubling element number one. The fact that we would have a president who would potentially put himself in a position of pressuring a foreign government. That's not how our diplomatic relationships are supposed to go. And then, of course, there's the primary piece that we should not have a president of the United States who's using his power to collect information for his own personal gain. And I think there are so many troubling threads here with these allegations that we really do need a full investigation to understand if they are true or if they are not. And I think the ramifications from a national security perspective go very far beyond where we are right now. What does this say, potentially, even just the allegations to other nations? Does this mean that we have a president that might treat another country favorably if they were to proactively provide information about one of his political rivals? There are so many elements that are deeply troubling, but the core facts of it, the fact that we have a president who would leverage his political position for his own personal gain and put U.S. assistance dollars on the table in such a manner, those allegations are striking.
You mentioned in your piece last night and just now that if these allegations are true, we still don't have all the facts. I mean, the president himself is pointing out that we still haven't seen a transcript of the phone call. We haven't seen the whistleblower's report. Do you think it is too early to be talking about an impeachment inquiry, given that we don't know all the facts yet, despite the president's admissions?
Well, I think the important piece about an impeachment inquiry or the congressional power of inherent contempt, subpoenas, or any other tools that we have, these are tools that allow Congress to get to the bottom of an issue. These are tools that allow us to have a privileged process when investigating these allegations. I don't think that it should be a foregone conclusion that we are definitely destined towards impeachment. I think I wanted to be very clear, as did my colleagues, that these allegations, if true, are impeachable offenses, but the goal at this point in time is to make clear the gravity of these allegations to the American people, to our colleagues in Congress, and to advocate that we use every tool available to Congress to get to the bottom of it and to prove these allegations true or false.
If the president releases tomorrow, as he has promised, the transcript of that phone call, will that be enough to settle these questions?
Oh, I don't think so. I think there are so many pieces of evidence that we need to have, and so many questions that we need to have answered. Why would the president have withheld hundreds of millions of dollars of security assistance to Ukraine? What were there other phone calls that occurred? What are the details that the whistleblower who came forward that currently the DNI is not allowing that information to go to Congress as required by law? There are many more unanswered questions than the actual substance of one particular phone call. And as a former CIA case officer, as a former law enforcement officer, for me, it is all about facts and evidence. And so I hope that my colleagues and certainly members of the press and the American people won't think that there is just one piece of evidence that we need to prove one way or the other. My hope is that we will pursue every element of information we possibly can have so that if we are getting to the point where we say these allegations are true or false, we know beyond a shadow of a doubt that that is in fact the case.
If the House were to gather all this evidence and see that it was important enough to vote to impeach the president, by all measures, the Senate is not going to convict the president. Do you still think it would be worth to go through this exercise?
Well, I am of the belief that people who are elected to office are going to put their oath to uphold the Constitution above and beyond their political affiliation. I believe, I have faith that any elected member of Congress or the Senate will eventually put country before party when the choice is there to make. If throughout the course of an investigation it becomes clear enough that there would be a positive vote on articles of impeachment within the House of Representatives, my expectation is that in order to get that outcome based on facts and evidence, it would be clear within the Senate what it is that they would be weighing in on.
All right, Representative Abigail Spanberger, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, William. I appreciate it.
We turn now for a Republican perspective on these impeachment calls. Congressman Andy Harris of Maryland is on the House Ukraine caucus, and he joins me now. Congressman, thank you very much for being here. I wonder if you could just give me your initial reaction to today's development, that the House is going to move forward with an impeachment inquiry.
Well, this is nothing new. There are dozens, if not over 100 members of the House who've wanted to try to impeach this president. They tried the Mueller investigation. It didn't work. Now they're going to try this. You know, I just think the American people needs to see the transcripts not only of the president's call, but of Vice President Biden's call, where he was holding up $1 billion worth of aid to the Ukrainian government when he was vice president. Again, his son earning $50,000 a month. The average American would want to know exactly what did his son do for $50,000 a month while his father was negotiating with the Ukrainians over $1 billion of aid. The American people need to know the truth.
I would like to touch on the Biden's role in this in just a moment. But first off, let's talk about the president's actions. The president has admitted that he pressured the president of Ukraine to look into the Bidens. Repeatedly, according to some reports, 8 times in one phone call. The president has also acknowledged that he withheld aid from Ukraine preceding this phone call. Do none of those actions trouble you?
Well, let's put it in the perspective. You know, the Ukrainian government has corrupt oligarchs in charge of a lot of things in the government, including the agency that Hunter Biden was associated with. And we've heard reports that military procurement, and a lot of these funds were going to military procurement, is corrupt in the Ukraine. The president is absolutely right to ask the Ukrainian government to investigate corruption when it involves hundreds of millions of dollars of taxpayer money from the United States.
But if it was the president saying repeatedly, I want you to look into Joe Biden and Hunter Biden, with the full knowledge that that could likely be his opponent in the presidential election, that does not give you pause?
Look, we're not going to talk about hypotheticals. Tomorrow we'll know what the transcript was. Let's talk about it after we know what the transcript was, and then let's urge Vice President Biden to release the transcripts of his dealings with the Ukrainians when he was vice president, because that goes to the heart of the matter. You know, we're dealing with a government that was rife with corruption, and the question is whether we should be sending hundreds of millions of dollars to that government without them taking a position to stop the corruption in the Ukraine.
Your colleagues across the aisle say we need to do this impeachment inquiry because it gives us more legal tools and facilitates the investigation that we feel we are being stonewalled on. This is the Democrats talking. Do you believe that if you believe that all the facts should come out and this will be a useful process, do you think this impeachment inquiry could be useful?
Look, the facts are going to come out tomorrow when the transcripts are released. The allegation was that the president, in a phone call with the Ukrainian leader, had some kind of quid pro quo on an investigation. We're going to find out tomorrow. Let's talk about it after the American people hear the transcript. And then let's release the transcripts of the vice presidents dealing with the Ukrainians involving $1 billion in foreign aid.
The president has said, as you are acknowledging, that he'll release the transcript. The Democrats argue they also need to see the whistleblower's complaint, the person who either heard this call as it was going down or read the transcript and said, something is amiss here. Would you support the whistleblower's complaint coming forward?
Well, we know he didn't hear the call because we know it was secondhand, his knowledge of the phone call. The bottom line is that his complaint was that the phone call was made and allegations of what was done in the phone call. We're going to know the transcript tomorrow. That's the whistleblower's allegation. The president has gone ahead and said, okay, let's look at the transcript. I think it's the right thing to do. I applaud the president for doing it. And then we need to look deeper into what was going on during the Obama administration when Vice President Biden was dealing with Ukraine and his son was earning $50,000 a month from a corrupt oligarch.
Do you think that when the Director of National Intelligence on Thursday testifies before the House, he has been asked repeatedly to give up this whistleblower's complaint. Do you think that should come forward? Should he provide more information about that particular complaint?
Look, my understanding, and again, that's not my area of expertise, but it's centered around whether this was urgent, and the law just says that if the DNI, the Director of National Intelligence, felt it was urgent, then it needs to be reported to Congress. That's a judgment call, but again, tomorrow we're going to see the transcript. We're going to know exactly what went on.
The president has hinted a few times that he thinks the Democrats are overplaying their hands, that in the end, if they go forward with this inquiry, that it will play to his political benefit. Do you think that that's true? Do you think that the Democrats are overplaying their hand here?
I absolutely agree. The bottom line is the American people want Congress to deal with the problems that Americans are facing and what they're concerned about. And right now, they're not really concerned about the Ukraine. What they're concerned about are jobs. They're worried about the economy. They're worried about what's going on here in the United States. And Congress is going to be distracted. The last time this happened in 1998, the party that held the impeachment was punished at the polls. It'll be the same way next year.
All right, Representative Andy Harris of Maryland, thank you very much for being here. Now, for a broader look at some of these developments, how House Democrats got to this point, what's next for them, for the Republicans, and for the president. Again, our Lisa Desjardins is on Capitol Hill, tracking the latest, and White House correspondent Yamiche Alcindor is following the president at the UN General Assembly in New York. Welcome to you both. Lisa, to you first. What a difference a day makes. Help me understand. With a few exceptions, the facts that were on the table yesterday are largely the same facts that are on the table today. How did this change so dramatically?
That's a great question, William. I think talking to Democratic aides, even those most closely involved in the decisions today, did not expect things to move quite this quickly. I do think a sign of the blowing kind of momentum was that letter from the 7 House Democratic freshmen. They weren't just any freshmen. They really were seen as almost holdouts on the question of impeachment. And they also are seen as having some of the most credibility when it comes to national security. So when they came out as a group late last night saying, we think it's time to move further on impeachment, if these accusations are true about the whistleblower, we think that is impeachable, which was actually sort of skipping a step from where the rest of Democrats have been. I think that really was just part of a wave of growing momentum over the weekend. And because of that, a dam that was breaking became more visibly breaking today for House Democrats. To me, the bigger question is, William, what exactly happened today? What does any of this mean, really, right? And I think the headline is that Democrats in the House are moving to impeachment proceedings, whatever you want to call them. Nancy Pelosi is now on board that effort. And here's another interesting thing, William, as we all try to get our hands around what is happening. I asked for some timeline information, got it from only one Pramila Jayapal, who's an important member of the House Judiciary Committee, Democrat from Washington State. William, she said, the point is we're going to now move more quickly on this question. It will not be a matter of months, she said. It will be faster than that.
I know you, Lisa, you've also been talking with Republican members as well. You heard Congressman Harris just now putting his defense forward. What are the other House members you're talking to saying about all this?
And just in the past few minutes, we've seen responses from House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy and Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell. Both of them are putting out a message that they think this is just another attempt to overturn the Trump presidency from their point of view. It's important that McCarthy is also going a step farther. He's saying that he doesn't think Nancy Pelosi has the power to declare this an official inquiry, that to do that requires a vote by the full House. So we're going to see some real process debate coming up. But I think when you talk about the merits, more importantly, William, there seem to be two main camps of Republicans, those ardent defenders of the president, as we heard from a few minutes ago. But then I think most Republicans right now are not sure what to make of this. One of the more philosophical members I talked to, Mac Thornberry, told me he is concerned about what this does for the dialogue to the country, and that if there is just a continuing shouting over impeachment, he's not sure how one issue over another can be separated. So there's a little bit concern about what this could do for divide.
We certainly have a lot of other moving pieces in this. The president says he's going to release the transcript of this call. We still haven't seen the whistleblower's complaint, but we know the Director of National Intelligence testifies Thursday. What are some of the other steps you might see?
I think that's right. We also are told by the House Intelligence Chairman, as reported, he's hoping that the whistleblower themselves will appear before the committee. That would be in a closed session. So there will be more information that does put Democrats in an interesting position, that they're moving forward. They're taking a big step before they have all the information, but they're confident, based on what they already know, not just in this investigation, but in several investigations, that it's time to move up, ramp up their steps on impeachment. But you know, William, the end game here for impeachment is the Senate. And the House is taking a big step here. House Democrats are making a big statement today. But ultimately, for a president to be convicted, the Senate has to get on board. And right now, the Senate's nowhere near that. But House Democrats seem to believe that now there is enough evidence to build a stronger case, if not taking the president out, at least convincing voters perhaps to vote against him next year.
Yamiche, turning to you, obviously there's this growing army of Democrats saying we need to start this formal inquiry. The Speaker seems to be behind that. You're with the president. How is the president and the White House reacting to all of this today?
The president is responding to Democrats saying that they're going to be opening a formal impeachment inquiry against him by lashing out at them. He's saying that this is part of a continued witch hunt, and that this really started with the Russia investigation and continues on now. He's been tweeting and talking about this all day. He essentially says that he's the victim of, quote, presidential harassment. He also accused Democrats of trying to ruin and demean his day here at the United Nations. I've been also emailing with the White House press secretary, Stephanie Grisham. She said that Democrats were trying to weaponize politics. But then I asked her, I said, well, how are you going to push back on this impeachment inquiry, and how are you going to deal with all of this? And she said, well, we're going to be releasing the transcript of that call, and that's going to put all this to bed. That's going to make all of this look ridiculous. But of course, Democrats are asking for the actual whistleblower complaint. That's much different than just a transcript. So this is really going to be something that's going to continue to develop, and the White House is still trying to put together their plan.
We saw the president today was also touting his approval rating amongst the GOP and tweeting out that percentage. Obviously, we have an election coming. That seems to be the sort of low rumble underneath all of this. Does the president see that this is a threat to him, or does he see that this might be a benefit to him?
Impeachment is really a double-edged sword for President Trump. On the one hand, publicly, he's saying that impeachment would be positive for him. It would help him get reelected by energizing his voters. But privately, people that are close to the president are also very worried about whether or not this is going to be too distracting for him, that he's going to be so focused on impeachment and the impeachment inquiries that he's not going to be focused on what Republicans want to get done in their time in office. Now, I've also been talking to people at the campaign, and the campaign was actually fundraising off of this idea that the president might be impeached. They were collecting money and asking supporters for money for what they were calling an impeachment defense task force. The other thing to note is that the campaign manager, Brad Parscale, the campaign manager of President Trump's 2020 election bid, he was actually saying that this is going to, again, mobilize voters here. Now, I should say there are risks on both sides, and I've been talking to Democratic sources and Republican sources all day who essentially were saying we got here because people were really worried about whether or not this was going to be something good for either party. So what we're going to see is really risks on both sides and people really trying to figure out whether or not this is going to be good for their party.
All right, Yamiche and Lisa, thanks for bringing us up to speed. In the day's other news, President Trump took on globalism and Iran in his formal address at the United Nations today. He spoke against the backdrop of this growing impeachment talk in Washington. Again, Yamiche Alcindor reports.
The president's tone may have been subdued.
If you want freedom, take pride in your country.
But his talk was still tough as he pushed his America First approach.
The future does not belong to globalists. The future belongs to patriots.
In his address to the United Nations General Assembly, President Trump targeted familiar foes. In particular, he called for allies to help counter Iran.
All nations have a duty to act. No responsible government should subsidize Iran's bloodlust.
And he called out Chinese trade policy.
It has embraced an economic model dependent on massive market barriers, heavy state subsidies, currency manipulation, product dumping, forced technology transfers, and the theft of intellectual property, and also trade secrets on a grand scale.
The president also used the World Forum to make his case for his domestic agenda. He praised U.S. unemployment rates and highlighted his tax cuts. And he was uncompromising on illegal immigration.
If you make it here, you will not be allowed in. You will be promptly returned home. You will not be released into our country.
Today's speeches also featured a number of authoritarian and far-right figures, including leaders from Turkey, Egypt, and Brazil. Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro dismissed warnings about wildfires in the Amazon rainforest.
The Amazon is not being devastated, nor is it being consumed by fire, as the media misleadingly says.
Meanwhile, President Trump did meet with one traditional ally, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson. The meeting came hours after Britain's highest court struck down Johnson's decision to suspend Parliament. The president offered him moral support.
He's doing a fantastic job, not easy, but doing a really good job, and I think he's going to make great progress come October.
For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Yamiche Alcindor at the United Nations in New York.
Mudslides and power outages hit the U.S. Virgin Islands today as Tropical Storm Karen arrived. The storm also brought heavy rain to Puerto Rico as winds of 45 miles an hour. Hours earlier, an earthquake shook the island but caused little damage. Farther north, Tropical Storm Jerry could reach Bermuda on Wednesday. It had sustained winds today at 50 miles an hour. In Northern California, threats of wildfires brought blackouts for more than 24,000 homes and businesses. Pacific Gas and Electric shut off electricity in parts of the Sierra Nevada foothills overnight amid hot and windy conditions. In the last 2 years, downed power lines have sparked huge fires in the state. As a result, PG&E is now in federal bankruptcy proceedings. U.S. health officials say there have been hundreds more cases of lung illnesses affecting e-cigarette users since last week. In all, 9 people have died in recent months and hundreds have been hospitalized. At a U.S. House hearing today, Dr. Ann Schuchat of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention said officials still don't know the cause.
We know that the products out there have changed a lot and the use has probably increased, but we don't yet know if there's a new particularly risky product out there or a substance that's in the products or manipulation that's dangerous.
The Trump administration has proposed a ban on flavored e-cigarettes, and this afternoon, the governor of Massachusetts ordered a temporary ban on the sale of all vaping products. The European Union's highest court sided with Google today, ruling that EU privacy standards do not apply globally. The landmark decision limits the reach of the so-called right to be forgotten. That standard lets users in Europe request that search engines remove some links from their names. France had asked that the rule be applied everywhere, not just within the EU. Famed opera singer Placido Domingo has withdrawn from performing with the New York Metropolitan Opera amid sexual harassment accusations. In a statement, he says he strongly disputes the claims, but does not want to be a distraction. He says he will not be returning to the Met. Domingo is 78 years old. And on Wall Street, stocks sank on worries about impeachment and a drop in consumer confidence. The Dow Jones Industrial Average lost 142 points to close at 26,807. The Nasdaq fell nearly 119 points, and the S&P 500 dropped 25. Still to come on the NewsHour, what's next in the Brexit saga after a critical move by the Prime Minister is ruled unconstitutional? Out of the shadows, the survivor of the Stanford University sexual assault case reclaims her voice. Plus, writer Ta-Nehisi Coates on myth, memory, and his first novel, The Water Dancer. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson's campaign to leave the European Union, deal or no deal, hit a roadblock today. The Supreme Court of the United Kingdom ruled that his decision to recess Parliament was illegal and that lawmakers can return to work immediately. In a moment, John Yang will explore what's at stake. But first, Kieran Jenkins with Independent Television News has all the details from another chaotic day.
For UK democracy, a defining day. For the Prime Minister, devastating. Boris Johnson's reasons for suspending Parliament, the reasons he gave the Queen, torn to shreds by the country's 11 most senior judges, unanimously.
The decision to advise Her Majesty to prorogue Parliament was unlawful.
We were witnessing, said the Supreme Court President, a one-off, history forged as the Prime Minister's 5-week suspension of Parliament was overturned.
Parliament has not been prorogued. This is the unanimous judgment of all 11 justices.
The consequences, enormous and immediate. Boris Johnson's political opponents, through the courts, will have him hauled back before Parliament.
So there is nothing to stop us, members of Parliament such as myself and my colleagues, from resuming immediately the important job of scrutinising this minority Tory government as we hurtle towards Brexit.
And so Parliament is soon to be unlocked.
I am ready for work. I shall be in my chair tomorrow, and I look forward to Parliament sitting, and we will go about our business. That's our responsibility, and I'll do my bit. It's only a part of the story. A lot of other people will, I'm sure, do their bit.
Do you expect the
and
Prime
that's
Minister
what the public would expect.
Do you expect the Prime Minister to be sitting there as well?
I've no idea who will and won't be there, but I will be there.
Prime Minister, are you going to resign?
He is staying as Prime Minister, but rushing back ahead of schedule tonight from the UN General Assembly.
I strongly disagree with this judgment, and we in the UK will not be deterred from getting on and delivering on the will of the people to come out of the EU on October the 31st.
The final monumental word, though, is the Supreme Court's. Its ruling on these two legal challenges begin to set the UK Constitution in stone.
Today's ruling confirms that we are a nation governed by the rule of law. Laws that everyone, even the Prime Minister, is not above.
And so Boris Johnson is forced back tomorrow to Westminster and a deluge of scrutiny.
Stormy days for British politics. So where does all this leave Boris Johnson, and where does it leave Brexit? Charles Kupchan is a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations and a professor at Georgetown University. During the Obama administration, he was the senior director for European Affairs. Mr. Kupchan, thanks for being here. Sure. Where does this leave Brexit? The deadline is 5 weeks away. What is the practical effect of this ruling today?
Well, it's a political bombshell of sorts in that there isn't a written constitution in the UK. No one knew how the Supreme Court was going to act. They didn't mince their words. They said Boris Johnson is standing in the way of the constitutional functions of Parliament, that it's unlawful, that it's void, and Parliament was supposed to be suspended for several more weeks. It's meeting tomorrow. It hems Boris Johnson in even more, but there was already legislation passed by Parliament before he suspended it that said a no-deal Brexit cannot happen. So right now, he doesn't have a lot of good options. On October 17, 18, there is a meeting of the heads of state of the EU. He will go. He will make one last pitch to get a deal. He probably is not going to get it, and at least according to Parliament, he then has to say, I need an extension.
He has to ask the EU for an extension.
Yes.
What are the chances that the EU will give him that?
I would say that a high likelihood, because if they didn't give Boris Johnson an extension, then Brexit would be on the EU's watch. So he'll get it. I think the key question is, will he ask for it? He has made his claim to fame on, we are getting out on October 31, no matter what. Is he going to ask for that extension? Is he going to defy Parliament? He may end up in jail if he did that, because he would be breaking the law.
Prime Minister Johnson has been in office for about 2 months now. He's lost a series of major votes in Parliament. He's lost his working majority in Parliament. He's losing members of his Conservative Party. What did today do to his standing? Can he remain as Prime Minister?
I think he'll probably stay at least for a few more weeks to get to that conversation with the EU to see if he can't get a deal. I'm guessing that he will stay and not resign, in part because what he really would like is an election. But he wants an election before October 31, because after that, if he's asked for an extension, the Brexit people may have lost confidence in him. The opposition wants an election to come after October 31, precisely because Boris Johnson will be weaker. Right now, it's anybody's guess how this plays out in the next few weeks, but at least for now, it looks like Brexit won't happen on October 31 because the Parliament has forbid it. The Parliament is now backed by the Supreme Court.
So taking a bigger picture, or pulling back a little bit, what's the effect of all this chaos in Britain on the world, on the United States?
Well, I think it's safe to say that Britain is going to be tied up in knots for years, because whether Brexit happens or whether it doesn't happen, they will be trying to sort this out, their relationship with the EU, their relationship with the United States. Britain is effectively missing in action. It's closed for business. That is a problem for a country that has been a closest partner of the United States. We, as this newscast has been saying, are also tied up in knots politically. So it's interesting that at this moment, the two Anglo-Saxon countries most responsible for building modernity as we know it, the globalized world, are in deep political trouble.
Charles Kupchan, thank you very much.
Now, the survivor of a rape case that captured the country's attention is reclaiming her identity and her voice. Amna Nawaz sat down earlier today with Chanel Miller. After she was assaulted in 2015 at Stanford University, she chose to stay anonymous. But now, Miller is talking very publicly about the difficult and traumatic road she faced trying to seek justice.
For years after her assault, she was known to the world as Emily Doe. But this week, Chanel Miller is stepping into the spotlight with her own name and her own words in the new memoir, Know My Name. In January of 2015, Miller was sexually assaulted while unconscious by Brock Turner, often described then as a star swimmer at Stanford University. 2 graduate students witnessed the attack behind a dumpster, chased Turner down when he fled, and pinned him down until police arrived. After the trial a year later, Turner was convicted of 3 felony counts of sexual assault, facing up to 14 years in prison. But Judge Aaron Persky sentenced him to just 6 months in county jail, saying a prison sentence would have a severe impact on him. The sentence sparked outrage, including among California voters who recalled the judge in 2018, the first time that's happened in more than 80 years. Miller's own powerful statement in court, 7,000 words plus, helped fuel that outrage and gave voice to sexual assault survivors everywhere. It was published in BuzzFeed and quickly went viral, shared by millions, even read aloud on the floor of Congress. Turner served only 3 months, and Miller stayed quiet for years. But with her new book, Chanel Miller is now sharing her story with the world. We met in New York earlier today. Chanel, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me, Amna.
I want to ask you about the story you lay out in the book. And I want to begin in the early morning hours of the 18th of January in 2015, when you wake up in an unfamiliar place and you have no memory of the night before, and a deputy turns to you and says you're in the hospital and there's reason to believe you've been sexually assaulted. What goes through your mind at that moment?
I was in complete denial. I think you can't accept immediately that the entire trajectory of your life has just changed. You want to believe that you can return to your ordinary life, that you were on some sort of track and that you will not immediately be derailed. So that's what I wanted to believe.
And at the time, we should clarify, you had no idea that the night before, as you said, when you went to a party with your sister, you'd passed out, you had been assaulted. And you don't learn this until days later when you see a news story pop up into your feed. The very first line of that story reads, "A former Stanford swimmer has been charged with raping an intoxicated, unconscious woman in an on-campus attack." You wrote at the time that you knew it was you. How did you know that?
Because everything in the story lined up. But I still, when reading the news, I felt disembodied. I didn't want to affiliate my identity with this graphic description that was being depicted on the news. I felt extremely exposed and stripped down. I had no ability to cover myself up or maintain any sense of dignity or privacy.
When you were first asked, because it's a choice whether or not you want to press charges, right?
Yes.
The state will move ahead with charges regardless. Whether or not you want to participate was a choice. And when you write about, in hindsight, looking back at the decision to move forward with charges, you said this. You said, "I didn't know that if a woman was drunk when the violence occurred, she wouldn't be taken seriously. I didn't know that if he was drunk when the violence occurred, people would offer him sympathy." How did you see that idea play itself out over the year leading up to and through the trial?
In the beginning, when I read the story, it was very clear to me what happened. If someone runs, they're exhibiting consciousness of guilt. They don't want to be caught, but he was. And so I thought, all right, he was caught. He's going to come back with his head hung low and apologize for what he has done. And instead, he lawyered up and came after me. I never thought it would go this far. I never thought we would go to trial. I didn't understand that there was so much to be discussed. I didn't think that a year and a half later, I would be in a testimony stand talking about FaceTiming my boyfriend and what I had to eat for lunch and dinner that day. It seemed to disintegrate into this meaningless interrogation, and what was very clear in the beginning quickly became murky. I feel that so much of the shame I experienced throughout that process was learned. And it's really incredible to me how much of the shame accumulated and was ingested throughout that process, so that by the end, I didn't recognize myself. I had no grasp on the situation. I feel like I didn't deserve to be treated well. I felt hollowed out and empty by the time the year and a half was over. It was an extremely brutal process that I don't expect anyone to go through.
When the sentence came down, again, there was just a flurry of attention because of how lenient it was. And you wrote about that in the book. You said the judge had given Brock something that would never be extended to me, empathy. My pain was never more valuable than his potential. What did you mean by that?
I mean, there was nothing ever to suggest that I had a life outside of the courtroom, that I was on a track of my own, that I had my own dreams and enjoyments and goals before the assault happened. I felt like nothing more than a body. I was spoken about in a very just physical way, but I didn't feel human. And I always felt suffocated, like no matter what I said, I couldn't be heard. I would look around and think, is anyone actually hearing me? It's a terrifying position to be in, to feel like you can cry on the stand, that you could yell a statement and people still don't hear you. You feel invisible, like you will forever be muted.
You had to relive many of those moments on the stand, in public, in front of strangers. You had to be asked and re-asked and re-answer a lot of those questions over many, many months. How is it that you kept going in all of those days? What did you tell yourself in those moments?
It feels like you're in the water, like taking in water, lapping it up, that you can never stop to get a breath of air, and only when I cried hard enough would they finally say, okay, enough, stop, and would release me to the bathroom. I would still wake up in the morning, and I would think, I'm still here, and I'm still showing up in court each time. Doesn't that mean something? The fact, even if I wasn't, posturing and speaking with a clear voice, even if I was humiliating myself on the stand, the fact of the matter is I was there. I was sitting in front of everyone, I was taking it. And the fact of just showing up, no matter how you show up, reminded me that I'm still going, and I'm going to make it.
Let me ask you about your statement. When you saw the millions of people reading it, responding to it, writing to you about it, why do you think it resonated the way that it did?
I think it was honest, that I was honest about the panic attacks that I had, the shame, the guilt, the fear, that everyone could relate to it. And I think we're all so used to experiencing that in an isolated context that we're not taught to openly speak about it. And so I think it was liberating for people to have those parts of their internal landscape finally put into light.
When you hear 6 months and when you understand he will be in jail for a matter of weeks, do you start to question why you went through everything you went through?
Oh yes, it felt almost like a joke. Like it was so anticlimactic. You have all this tension and grief and trauma over 1.5 years, and you get there and they say, all right, 6 months, which will ultimately be 3. It felt like this really light dusting off. No big deal. Thank you for coming.
For all those years, people knew you only as Emily Doe. What's it like to see your name, Chanel Miller, in big, bold letters on the cover of a book?
It's really wonderful. I feel like I can fully exist in the world. I feel like in the beginning I was really scared that I would be branded by this case, that would be my label exclusively. So the fact that I'm able to emerge as a writer with this tangible object to anchor me is really wonderful, and I feel very proud of that.
Chanel Miller, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Mix fantasy and history to tell a tale of slavery and memory. In the latest addition to the NewsHour bookshelf, Jeffrey Brown sits down with Ta-Nehisi Coates about his new book. It's part of our arts and culture series, Canvas.
Strange theory. Ta-Nehisi Coates, appearing before Congress this year to make the case for reparations for the human and economic costs of slavery.
The typical black family in this country has 1/10 the wealth of the typical white family. The matter of reparations is one of making amends.
An example of the forceful advocacy and powerful data-driven argument for which he's become so well known, writing influential magazine articles and a series of nonfiction works, including his 2015 National Book Award winning Between the World and Me. But it turns out for the last 10 years, he's also been writing something else, going beyond facts and figures.
The math and the numbers are really, really important. But when you start getting the individual people, there's a part in Between the World and Me where I say, slavery is not an amalgam of, people. It's literally this person doing ... Mm-hmm. And this is the attempt to, live in the world of such a person.
And that's an answer to why fiction.
Yes, that's definitely an answer.
Coates' latest book is a novel, his first, The Water Dancer, set on a plantation in 19th century Virginia along the Underground Railroad system of safe houses that helped slaves escape to freedom, and in Philadelphia. Historical figures are woven in, most notably Harriet Tubman, the former slave whose heroic rescue missions brought hundreds of slaves north. In New York recently, Coates said he wanted to counter what he sees as the many myths of the Old South that continue to this day.
What became clear to me is that you can't win this argument by showing documents. You know, like the facts won't do it. Like that's not, like people are holding on to something else. This is the reason why people gather, for instance, you know, to protest taking down Confederate statues. This is not a problem of history, this is a problem of myth.
When you say myth, you mean like story?
Story, yes, exactly right.
So you're taking actual things and giving it a different sort of life in fiction.
Yes, and much as that, you know, myth was drawn out of you know, actual history. Robert E. Lee is a historical figure, and then there's a, you know, mythological Robert E. Lee. I felt like maybe there was an opportunity to do the exact same thing with black people who lived under the period of enslavement, that there were stories and myths that could be drawn out and written in a compelling and literary way.
How much research went into it? Did you approach this? Yes? You're laughing as...
It was a lot.
A lot?
A lot.
But so you approach this the way you're a nonfiction, you're a journalist?
I did. I mean, that was the start. So what? I mean, I visited a ton of, you know, slave plantations.
Did you read firsthand accounts?
Read a ton of firsthand accounts.
Yes. But how much did it end up informing the...
I couldn't have written a book without it. I felt like the great challenge of the book was that there is already in, I think, most people's minds, an image of slavery. And that image revolves around whips, it revolves around chains, it revolves around cotton picking, revolves around rape. They're, you know, all of these tropes that are already there.
And they're all true.
And they're all true, they're definitely all true. But you know, when I went back through the documentation, the thing that struck me the most, in fact, was how much family separation was a part of the story of enslavement. Much of the grieving that I saw is, you know, a wife separated from a husband, a mother separated from a child, a father separated from a child separated from a grandmother. And that's the place the water dancer lives.
But there's more. Coates is also a longtime reader and writer of comics and fantasy stories, including part of the Black Panther series. He's given his young protagonist in the novel his own kind of superpower, one based on memory. It's an interesting superpower to give an enslaved person. Mm-hmm. Memory.
Right. Yeah, because I
almost an inability to forget.
So a lot of this is about how African Americans remember their own history. They're, you know, and I think this is no longer true, but certainly, let's say 2 or 3 generations before me, there certainly was a prevailing notion that we didn't talk about enslavement. We just didn't, you know, mention it. You just move on. You don't repeat the traumas. But one of the implicit ideas, I think, in this is that you can't actually move. There's so much that you can't do when you're so intent on forgetting. And there's so much more you can do if you know, actually, you know, grab it by the reins, you know, grab memory by the reins, you know, and say, look, this happened.
Please welcome Ta-Nehisi Coates.
Coates' celebrity has taken him far, and he's regularly cited as one of today's leading public intellectuals. I asked if he felt pressure to make everything he puts out, including this novel, feel important to the moment.
It doesn't have to be important, but I have to feel like it's really good. I have to be excited. But I don't need to be operating in front of a big crowd every time. I need to be excited about a challenge. I need to feel good about it. I need to, you know, not be able to sleep. That was true before I had an audience. That will be true after my audience leaves me.
Coates' novel is the latest by an African-American artist to explore painful history and culture in creative new ways, including a forthcoming film on Harriet Tubman.
Whoa. I think what you have is a number of African Americans who have a level of prominence in literature, in the arts, in media, working actually with other African Americans. They aren't alone.
More comfortable or more urgent or more?
No, I think the desire was always there. But I think it's very different when you have a community of people, you know, who are working at a certain level, telling those stories.
And what do you think this is or might add up to in terms of a retelling of this, you know, the story, the myth, the actual history?
I think part of the history of racism and white supremacy in this country is the stranglehold it's had on the story the country tells itself. If there is any area of optimism that I'm optimistic about, it's in that area. There's politics that happens at the ballot box, and then there's a broader context around that politics, another kind of politics that happens in our culture. When you see white kids, little white kids dressing up as Black Panther for Halloween. Something's shifting. Something's changed. That wasn't true when I was a kid. Who you see as a hero, who you see as a human being, all of that informs the actual politics. And it's that greater context where I probably see the most shift and the most change.
All right, the book is The Water Dancer. Ta-Nehisi Coates, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me, Jeffrey.
And that's the NewsHour for tonight. I'm William Brangham. Join us online and again here tomorrow evening. For all of us at the PBS NewsHour, thank you and good night.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by BNSF Railway, Consumer Cellular, Financial Services Firm Raymond James, the Ford Foundation, working with visionaries on the front lines of social change worldwide. Carnegie Corporation of New York, supporting innovations in education, democratic engagement, and the advancement of international peace and security at carnegie.org. And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.